we're going to get right into this because we've got a lot of questions to talk to Chad about, and I know that we want to take questions from the audience. It's great to be back here today. We were here on your very first day that you took office with HRC. A lot has happened since then, and although we've all read newspaper articles, we've been watching TV about the historic Supreme Court decisions, we'd like to hear from your perspective what these decisions mean to all of us.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me here, and thank you, Hillary, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Skip. I saw you back there somewhere. Skip Rutherford, who I've known since I was first working on the Clinton campaign when I was but a child at age 18. My mom wondering why I wasn't going to college, but I was driving every day to Little Rock. I knew he was going to be president someday. No, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be with Kathy Webb, a true leader and pioneer in this state, who has stood up. Kathy has stood up for equality for a very long time, and thanks to Kathy and to many of her colleagues, this is one of only a handful of states that actually has a statewide law providing anti-bullying protections. So thank you, Kathy, for your long-time leadership in this state. You know, it was about a year ago. I started my first day on the job on June 11th at a very early morning breakfast at the Honeycomb Restaurant on Main Street in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Who's been to the Honeycomb? See? Wow, it's a popular place. And then I came to Little Rock and got to spend time. I know I see a lot of familiar faces here in the room, folks I met last time. And this country's in a very different place than where we were a year ago when it comes to equality. When I was here a year ago, we had never won at the ballot box. There were two cases that we thought might be on their way to the United States Supreme Court, one challenging the discriminatory and, by the way, ridiculously named Defense of Marriage Act, and the other, a case that I and others in California put together where we hired Ted Olson and David Boies, the famed bipartisan duo, to challenge California's hateful marriage ban. And both of those cases were pending in varied levels of lower federal court. And several months ago, we all made history when the United States Supreme Court chose to hear not one, but two cases as it relates to LGBT equality, one on DOMA and the other on Prop 8. So for these last several weeks leading up to the decision, I and our lawyers and our plaintiffs and our team went every single day that that court was announcing decisions, thinking that it was going to be ours. So I would pack a suitcase, I would get in cars, we would all go to the Supreme Court, and we would all go in, we would sit down, and then our decisions didn't come. And so on day 5, that was our decision day. And we were seated in that Supreme Court, and I don't know if any of you had ever been there. I've never been until these two cases. But silence is enforced in that courtroom. So there's zero ability to react to anything, the best or the worst. And we're seated there a week ago Wednesday in that silent room, and when the clock struck 10, the gavel went down, we all stood again in silence, and those 9 justices took their seats. And then again, silence began. And then the historic decision was read by Justice Kennedy in the DOMA case, which if you haven't read it, you should, because he read it so that we non-lawyers could understand it. And it just goes through and dismantles all of our opposition's claims as to why we shouldn't have equality in this country. Now, as you probably know, the Defense of Marriage Act is a law that prevents states that have chosen to move forward on their own with marriage equality. It prevents the federal government from recognizing that marriage as a lawful and legal marriage. So that case came first, and I was really happy. I had a big smile on my face, but I didn't dare make a noise. And we're all seated there. Adam Umhafer, my colleague here, runs the American Foundation for Equal Rights. He's here today. He was on one end of the bench. It was sort of like the church pews we all grew up seated in. And then were the 4 plaintiffs and then me, and we were all sort of clenching the edge of those benches. And then the chief had the final decision to be read. They read the summary of the case, and then they read the decision. And the chief read the Prop 8 decision, and we held on to every word because you're fearful that each sentence might be undermined by the next one. So, but as he finished, it was clear that the two symbols of discrimination in this country, DOMA and Prop 8, were about to be gone and relegated to the dustbin of history. And that marriages would soon start again in California, and our federal government would start recognizing those marriages as they should have long ago. So we all stood in silence, and we gathered outside in the lobby with tears in our eyes and knots in our throats, and we started to ascend those stairs of that grand courthouse, and you could hear a roar. You could hear the roar of thousands of people who were in front of us outside, many of whom had traveled from all over the country to be there. And then you turned on your phone, and we heard the roar of all of you. Facebook, Twitter, text messaging, emails. I've still been unable to check all of them because this was not just a victory from the plaintiffs in those cases or the gay and lesbian couples who live in New York or in California, but it was a victory for all of us. And that night we celebrated. We celebrated around the country, from New York to California and everywhere in between. But then we woke up the next morning and we had to roll up our sleeves to get to work because we also have to acknowledge that those two victories were historic, but those victories, the arm of justice wasn't felt in places like Arkansas or in places like Texas. And the very next day, I spent the day in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is about as red as it gets. Because you have to take a slight moment, 5 minutes, to celebrate, but then you have to pivot and use those tremendous victories to catapult ourselves to the next. And so now, we've got to work like we've never worked before and build upon the leadership of folks like Kathy Webb and many of you in this room who've been laying the groundwork in this state for a very long time. And we've got to fight like we've never fought before until those victories and full and complete equality reach every single person in every corner of this country, including Arkansas.
We both obviously know what it's like to grow up gay in Arkansas. What do these decisions mean to a gay kid who's growing up in Little Rock today?
Yeah. Let me take you back to election night. President Obama was elected 4.5 some odd years ago, the most historic election of our lifetimes, perhaps. I was in San Francisco that night in a hotel where we were waiting the election returns. Downstairs was the ballroom for the Obama campaign. Across the hall was the ballroom for the Proposition 8 campaign. And I was seated in that hotel room with a group of friends and with the mayor at the time, Gavin Newsom, and we're watching Obama's speech in Chicago, history. But we had blank stares on our faces because in front of that computer screen, or between me and the TV was a computer screen that showed not only was Proposition 8 going to pass in California, but a horrendous anti-gay adoption ban was about to pass in my home state of Arkansas, and a marriage ban was about to pass in Florida that same night. So particularly for an LGBT Democrat, and certainly for LGBT folks in those states, it was a really depressing election night with an inability to celebrate. And I am certainly a competitive person, and I don't like to lose. But front of mind wasn't that loss. Front of mind was the message that was sent that night to that LGBT young person who's living right here in Little Rock, or in Hope, Arkansas, where I was born, or in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, where I went to high school, and everywhere in between, that he or she is a second-class citizen. They're less than, that they're unequaled, and they're deemed so by their government, and this time by a vote of the people. And the message that sends to that young person, and the license to discriminate that gives to parents, to preachers, to teachers, to community leaders, is terrible, tragic. And it's for that young person It's for that young person that we all fight this fight every single day. Yes, we all deserve equality in our own lives. But it's that young person growing up today who is told that he or she is second class or is less than, that we fight this fight. And we've got to fight it with a great sense of urgency, because every single day of delay, there's a consequence to the life of that young person. And Kathy, as you know, we last year conducted a survey of 10,000 young people across this country, including a significant sample size right here in the state of Arkansas. And I'll just tell you one interesting contrast. We asked LGBT people, as well as straight teens, LGBT teens and straight teens, what their top stresses in life are. These are junior high, high school age, straight teenagers, no surprise. Graduating from high school, getting into college, and their finances, so the job they work outside of school. For me, it was at Walmart. I enjoyed that job, by the way. The customer is always right. I learned it from a very early age, although sometimes they're not right. But for LGBT teenagers, coming out of the closet, family rejection, and bullying at school, those are their top 3 concerns. For a young person, that's what they have to worry about. Now, they also have to worry about graduating from high school, getting into college, working the second job, but those are forced down to second-tier issues. And so that's why we have to fight this fight, because we have to change that. A young LGBT person in this country should be able to grow up with the exact same hopes, dreams, aspirations, and yes, challenges as their straight peers. And we've got to ensure that that reaches them sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Chad. And we just came from a press conference at the Capitol with a number of public policy leaders and other community leaders, and we talked about some things in Arkansas that are changing for the better. Can you share some of that information with the folks here?
Yeah, absolutely. I first of all mentioned how proud I am that this state, my home state, has an anti-bullying ban. But it doesn't stop there. As we all know, there's a long, long, long ways to go in this state and states just like it across this country. But we commissioned a bipartisan poll that just came out of the field about a week ago, where we looked at where this state is today on a number of issues. We used Mitt Romney's pollster paired with a prominent Democratic pollster who's done work for Clinton and Obama and so forth, because we wanted to be really legitimate, particularly in red states like this. And we wanted everyone to pay attention, Democrats and Republicans alike. And it showed a number of things. One, it certainly showed the distance we still have to go. But the opposition to marriage equality has dropped to 55% in this country. We're at about 55 to 40. And you say, wow, we've still got a long ways to go to cross the finish line. But that is movement. And in politics, what matters is not where you are at a particular snapshot or moment in time, but what matters is the trajectory, where you're headed, what the trend lines look like. And make no mistake about it. The trend lines across this country, and specifically the trend lines in this state, are headed towards full and complete support, including marriage equality. But it's up to all of us to move those numbers as fast as we can. And we've got to take that 50%, 55% below 50, and we've got to take our 40, we've got to skyrocket those numbers up. And we can do it. We've seen the country move to a majority support of marriage equality, but at the same time, we've seen significant movement and shifts in the South, too, and this poll shows in Arkansas. A couple of other things. One of my favorite numbers, I know this will surprise you. Young people are always the smartest. Arkansans under the age of 30, there are a few of you in here. I'm no longer that. Arkansans under the age of 30 support marriage equality by a margin of 61%. Over 60% of Arkansans under 30 support marriage equality. So the lesson there is, one, where these numbers are headed, but two, the politicians better wake up. They better wake up. We've still got a lot of work to do to change hearts and minds. And in places like this, yes, it's Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. And we can't get mad at them. We've got to talk to them. Because when we talk to them, and when they know us, and when they hear our stories, And when they realize we're the neighbor next door, or we're the child, we're the son, the daughter, they come our way. Because when you know someone, who wants your friend, your child, your neighbor, your cousin, your aunt, your uncle to be treated as less than you? No one's asking for anything special. No special rights, no different rights, no unique rights. We simply want the same rights as the neighbor next door. And then you have to ask two questions. And if you remember one thing, it's use these two questions day in and day out. There are only two questions that matter. One, what harm is done by providing full equality to LGBT people? What harm's done? I can't find any straight couple in this country that lives in a marriage equality state who will tell you that their marriage fell apart because the gay couple next door moved in. Nobody. Not one. Not one. That gay couple next door is struggling to pay their bills and mow their lawn and get their kids to school and put food on the table. The exact same struggles and lives that the rest of have. The second question, what harm is done by not providing full equality, including marriage equality? Well, guess what? Real harm is done, particularly to young people, particularly to families who don't have the most basic of protections when it comes to their kids, when it comes to hospital visitation and inheritance, and a whole host, more than 1,000 different rights, benefits, responsibilities, and privileges come with marriage. And when you break it down to those two basic things, as the Supreme Court found, at least the majority of the Supreme Court found, there is no justification, period, to discriminate. There's not one. Then they may try to turn the corner and give you a religious argument. Well, guess what? There's not a religious argument either. As I said this morning, I grew up going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and usually Wednesday nights if my mom could convince me. Never did I hear any teaching coming out of that Southern Baptist church that one should hate, one should discriminate, one should judge. No. We all learn the golden rule, treat others as you wish to be treated, and love thy neighbor. Those are the basic themes. And we have to have this conversation at a religious level too, because most people grow up and attend church. And so you can't just write off those who will try to utilize religion against us. Because religion and religious teachings, I don't care what denomination you're part of, they all of them call for full and equal treatment of all of our people. What religion asks us to discriminate against someone, to treat them differently, simply because of who they are, how they were born, or in religious terms, how God made them? When we have conversations at this level, hearts and minds are changed. But it's a lot of work to do it, and we've got to acknowledge we still have a lot to do in places like Arkansas.
Thank you. It is a lot of work, but I'm glad that you were able to share with us that we are making progress in Arkansas. And I will tell you, as I've talked to my former colleagues who oppose marriage equality and other issues that are related to us, every single one of them tells me that their kids who are 18, 20, 21, who have been raised in evangelical churches typically totally support marriage equality and could care less about that. So what I know anecdotally certainly confirms what your poll found out. Okay, Chad, what's next for HRC and the gay rights movement?
Yeah, well, first of all, starting with the fact of acknowledging that our job is equality everywhere for everyone and writing off no one. If you look at a map right now and you see where equality is, it's for the most part on our coasts, right? It's on the East Coast, it's on the West Coast. Well, most people live everywhere in between. We have two exceptions. We have two exceptions that I'm really, really proud of. One is the state of Iowa. Iowa became one of our first states in this country to support marriage equality. And it's because a very wise Supreme Court in the state of Iowa, in a unanimous decision, I think, by the way, all 9 of those justices appointed by Republican governors, ruled it unconstitutional to deny marriage equality in that state. And again, I want to point out, in Iowa, still the corn grows. There has been no harm done to anyone, anywhere, and there has only been benefit to that state, benefit to those families, and benefit to that state's economy. and it's been fantastic for that state. Another is Minnesota. When I was here last time, we didn't have the state of Minnesota. Our opposition made a huge mistake. They put forward a constitutional ban on the ballot this last November, and they thought we wouldn't fight it, and they thought we couldn't win. Guess what? We beat them at their own game for the very first time. We beat them. And we beat them because of months and months and a couple of years of organizing in that state. And folks coming together, LGBT and straight alike, coming together and organizing and changing hearts and minds. That's the only way we won. We couldn't have won in a vacuum. So we did that, and then we turned around 3.5 months later with a number of other organizations and our state partners there on the ground, and we passed marriage equality in the state legislature, and the governor signed it. And that's one model of how to get things done. There are some states where you can win at the ballot. There are some states you can win in state court. There are other opportunities in federal court. We have 9 federal court cases pending right now. And there are other states where you have a lot of work still to do to change hearts and minds before you can win at any of those places. So we've got to utilize these victories we have and move into this really a new frontier. And I don't mean folks hadn't been working, because as I said earlier, there have been people who have been laying the groundwork day in and day out for years upon years in states like this. Now we've got to look at those 37 states. And in each of them, it's not going to be the same in every one of them. But we've got to organize like we've never organized before. We've got to stand up and tell our stories, and we've got to change hearts and minds. And that's why this week, this is my first stop. I actually spent the weekend with my family. And I tried skiing again, by the way. I don't recommend that if you haven't done it for a long time. So I was able to spend a few days with my family in Hot Springs this weekend. And then I leave from here and go to North Carolina, and then to Virginia. And then I end in Jackson, Mississippi. If you think things are challenging in Arkansas, come with me to Mississippi. But you can't write off anyone or any place when it comes to equality. We've got to win it everywhere. One other thing, we're talking a lot about marriage, and in terms of what's coming up, in more than half the states in this country, it is perfectly legal to fire someone because they're LGBT. Most people don't know that. It's perfectly legal to fire someone simply because their boss saw a photo on their desk of she and her partner. Fire them. And by the way, tell them that's why you're firing them. You can't do that with anyone else. But with LGBT people in more than half the states in this country, you can fire them or not hire them in the first place because of who they are, how they were born. We've got to change that. The vast majority of the country supports that. Over 80% of Americans support these basic protections. So we're about to have our first hearing coming up this week in Washington in Senator Harkin's Help Committee on a federal law to protect LGBT people. And I hope and believe that we can get that out of committee. We can get a vote on the Senate floor. Again, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take organizing in all states, including this one, in order to get the votes we need to get out of the Senate, and then ultimately, again, to fight like we've never fought before to make progress in this House of Representatives, a House of Representatives that couldn't even pass the Farm Bill. But we've got to make progress where we can. And while we're moving that federal legislation, we can perhaps make progress at the local level. We can get these non-discrimination protections done at the city level, at the municipal level, and in some places at the state level. Because what's more American than treating people and judging people at work based on their performance, not on who they are? That shouldn't be controversial, and our politicians, again, need to catch up, and they need to lead on this, and we're going to work like heck to make sure that they do. And those who don't, we're going to work like heck to make them feel pain for it.
Chad, we're going to change gears for a minute. Here we are at the Clinton School, the Clinton Library right next to us. Everybody knows that you were the youngest staffer to work in the Clinton White House. And what's it been like to you to watch that family's evolution on LGBT issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when I say everyone evolves, I really do mean it. The more folks know us and hear from us and talk to us, they evolve, and they always evolve our way. I don't know anyone who evolved the other way. That includes our leaders. It includes President Obama, it includes President Clinton, and it includes Senator, Secretary of State, former First Lady, who knows what's next, Hillary Clinton. But what's important is when a leader realizes that they're on the wrong side of the issue, they stand up and they acknowledge it, and then they work on our behalf to fix it. And that's exactly what those two have done. That's exactly what President Obama has done. He has been incredible. He has been a leader like we've never had before in the White House on these issues. President Clinton has acknowledged that he was wrong as it relates to DOMA. He was very active and made his views public prior to us going into the Supreme Court. And an interesting story around Hillary Clinton, about 2 weeks before we went into oral arguments on the Supreme Court. She had been Secretary of State, and when you're Secretary of State, you're not supposed to express your views on anything other than international issues, and those directives come from the White House, and so she didn't comment her entire time as Secretary of State on any domestic issue. So I was in New York one day, and I was meeting with openly LGBT employees at Macy's corporate headquarters in Manhattan, and the speech went too long, and I missed my train. And so I was rebooking the train, and I had to take the train back from Penn Station in New York City back to Union Station. And if any of you have ever been in Penn Station at rush hour, it's a nightmare. You have to fight for a seat, and there's never room for your bags, and you're sweating, and you're fighting your way down those escalators. And I got to the bottom, and I had my bag, and it was crowded. There were police everywhere. It's like, why are there police as I'm getting on the train? And I turn and get onto the Acela Express, the Amtrak. And Hillary Clinton was seated there on the Amtrak. You get downgraded a bit when you're not Secretary of State. They make you take, you lose those government planes. And so she too was on Amtrak. And she was as surprised as I was to see one another. And we had a great conversation about marriage equality. That was on a Wednesday. That following Saturday, she recorded her 5-minute message about marriage equality, which I thought was incredibly eloquent. That we released through HRC to our members and then ultimately to the world that following Monday. And on the international front prior to that, and most of you probably know that, she has been an incredible champion and leader, including in places, by the way, where it's very difficult in a lot of these countries to talk about these issues, and she has not been scared. She has challenged leadership in foreign countries, and she has stood up, and she has been a real leader. So to see these two folks who are really mentors of mine. Growing up in Arkansas, she was my first lady, he was my governor virtually my entire life. And so to see them now standing up on behalf of equality the way they do is incredibly gratifying. And by the way, because they're leaders, other people follow them. Other hearts and minds are changed because of their leadership.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story, too, the personal story. A minute ago, you touched on that over half of the states have no protection for LGBT workers. And of course, Arkansas is one of those states where you can be fired simply because you're gay. And you touched on the bill that will be brought up in Congress. What can we do here in Arkansas to help with that effort? And what's it going to take to get something passed? As you mentioned, the Farm Bill didn't even pass. So what can we do?
Again, organize, organize, organize. We need votes of Republicans and Democrats, or we won't win. You have a little bit of one and a lot of the other in this state. We need the leadership of those who are elected in this state in Washington to be with us on this issue. Some of the elected officials here are undecided, or at least haven't publicly expressed their views on these issues, and we need them. Both of the senators from this state, quite frankly, should be supportive of something that's such a basic fairness, quite frankly, a Republican-like principle of fairness and liberty and equality. And so you're going to be hearing a lot more of us in this state, because as we make progress on that bill, we're going to be in communities and in states across this country where our members of Congress have to go on weekends, every single weekend, and face their constituents. And they need to hear from all of you. I need never to hear from a member of Congress. This is a true story. This actually happened with an elected official who will remain nameless. But an elected official in Washington, I was meeting with him one day, and we were talking about, you know, all of these issues of equality and marriage equality and everything else. And this was someone who was not at least publicly supportive of our issues. And he looks at me and he says, without expressing any change of view, he looks at me and he simply says, you know, you live in D.C. now and you lived in California before. He's like, but my state's different. We just don't have that many LGBT people in my state. See, you laugh, but he was serious. He didn't say that to be offensive. He did not say that to be offensive. And at first my reaction was, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're saying something so ridiculous. But then I went to a place of, wow, responsibility is on all of us. Responsibility is on all of us, because he hadn't heard from us. That particular elected official had not heard from enough LGBT people in his particular state. And so moments like that provide me with great motivation, because I guarantee you the next time I meet with this person, he will have heard from many LGBT people in his state, and he will be well aware that we're not only LGBT people in his state, but it's straight allies. And it's straight allies in every single state that will allow us to cross this finish line. Straight allies, many of whom are here today. That's how we win. So you'll hear, back to your question, you're going to hear a lot more from HRC in the weeks and months to come as we organize across the country, particularly in targeted states where we need the elected support, and this is one of those states.
And there are elected officials in Arkansas who have also made that comment. How many can there be is one of the ways that it was put to me. Last time we had such great questions from the audience, we wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to do that today. So it's okay with you, we'll go ahead and open it up to people in the audience.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name's Lynn Phillips. This morning on NPR, I heard a report. They were talking about Goldman Sachs and the fact that because New York has marriage equality and New Jersey doesn't, that they are really working to try to relocate people to states that do have it. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, because obviously the corporation is king, how HRC is trying to work with corporations to further equality.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one of, I think, our most successful programs at the Human Rights Campaign is our workplace program, the Corporate Equality Index, where we go in, we work with companies all over the country, including companies right here in this state, to get them to treat their employees equally and provide equal benefits to same-sex partners, spouses, whatever they may be deemed in that particular state. Companies have led the way on this issue. And by the way, I'm not talking lefty, liberal, progressive companies. I'm talking mainstream American brands. For instance, in Minnesota, General Mills was one of our top leaders on equality. The chairman and CEO of General Mills was one of the most eloquent spokespeople. That's not a company that ever takes a political position. They don't view this as political. They view this as a human issue, and an issue that affects their bottom line, and an issue that affects their employees. So we've got to bring more companies into that program, and we've got to change. We've got to move companies up. Walmart, for instance, a company some of you are familiar with, they were at about a 50 when I started a year ago. Today, they're at about a 65. Again, it's where you're moving, not how far you've moved. We've got to continue to increase that. 100 is the perfect score, and every company in America should be at 100. I think more than 300 are at 100% in this country today. So our corporate leaders are really helping to lead the way when it comes to equality. But now they've really started to step out of the boardroom and advocate on behalf of equality in the court of public opinion, but also in state legislatures and in Congress. Some of our most eloquent spokespeople in our congressional hearings, including the ones coming up, are business leaders. But specifically, the example that she gave as it relates to Goldman Sachs, and it's sort of a perfect example of two Americas. New York and New Jersey, next to each other, a river separates them and a bridge, more than one, connects them. If you're on one side of that bridge, You get full equality, you get full benefits, your state and your federal government treats you equally. And that has incredible impact on families, on your employees, on your bottom line, on health insurance, on and on and on. So if you're a company and you can be on one side of the bridge that does that for your employees, or you can cross the bridge and be on the side where there's zero equality, where there's no marriage equality, and where your employees are treated differently under the law, what side of the bridge are you going to locate your company on? What side of the bridge do you think that you can attract the best employees on? People are going to choose the places that have full equality. And that's why I hope a state like Arkansas, leading the way, it's good for business. It's good for business. And at the press conference this morning, it was mentioned that the first state in the South to step forward with full equality, you're going to see a lot of businesses looking to relocate in that state. A lot of businesses. There's not a single business in this country that doesn't have LGBT employees, whether they know it or not. So I hope Arkansas can be one of those states in the South that really leads the way, not only because it's right, it's morally right, and it's the right thing to do to our fellow citizens, but it's also the right thing to do financially and from a business perspective and for the economy of this state. And so for those who are on the other side, once again, it's an argument that you just can't make, and it falls apart. If you're on the other side, not only do you not want folks to be treated equally, but you want to put your state in a place where you're not best positioned when it comes to the economy or to attracting jobs, to increase your tax base. It's the right thing to do.
I'm Louis Lefebvre. I want to thank y'all for all the work that you do. I have a question. I'm a 35-year federal retiree, and we're getting married in Vermont next month. What are the chances of the benefits that I have being transferred over to my spouse?
Well, nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. The question that you present are what thousands and thousands and ultimately millions of LGBT people are asking across this country. After a government has treated you as less than equal, where your partner's not been able to receive any benefits. How long have you been together? 20 years. Congratulations, by the way. So the federal government, and I've been impressed right after this Supreme Court decision in both of these cases, within an hour, President Obama had called me, and we had a discussion about what we have to do to ensure that these two Supreme Court decisions reach as many people as possible. And with the leadership of the White House and the Attorney General, this federal government has moved really quickly in these initial, however many we are, 12 days since those rulings. President Obama said that in his view, and he believes in the view of the federal government, a marriage should be a marriage. And so what that should mean is that if you were married in any legal location, so in any of the 13 states or the District of Columbia, and you come back home to your home state of Arkansas, the federal government, in all the places that they can, will recognize your marriage as a legal one. Now, there are, as I said, there are thousands of places where marriage is in federal code and regulations and laws. Many of these things the executive branch are going to be able to change on their own. There are some things that are going to take, unfortunately, further congressional action. So we are moving the ball forward on all fronts. We're working closely with the administration to ensure that gay and lesbian couples who got married in any legal location, when they go home to one of those 37 states like this one, your federal government, regardless of what your state says, your federal government views your relationship, your marriage, just as the same way that they view my mom and stepdad's marriage, and the benefits that you get are exactly the same as those that they get. That's all being worked out now, and thank goodness for Justice Kennedy's sweeping decision that gives some clear direction there, and thanks to the Obama administration for really leading.
When you touched on INDA earlier, I was curious, will it be a trans-inclusive INDA that's being supported or put forward, or is that going to remain without the transgender protection that was stripped a few years ago?
The piece of legislation now is fully inclusive. It's LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And I and we in this organization, nor will most of the folks I know in Congress who support it, support anything other than a fully inclusive non-discrimination act. And I should say, we do have to be ready when our opponents will try to divide our community on this. But I can tell you that we will support nothing other than a fully inclusive Employment Non-Discrimination Act.
Hi, my name is Michelle Wilson. I'm a recent graduate from Philander Smith College, and we did some work with the Human Rights Campaign about a little over a year ago. My question is, you're talking about doing more work here in Little Rock. I want to know if we would be establishing a HRC community here, because I noticed on the website Little Rock isn't listed, and we have communities in such states as Kansas and Missouri. So I was curious on if we can get that started here, and what exactly is the process that Little Rock could become a part of that?
Well, we're not announcing anything today, but as you might guess, I have a special interest in this state. And I continue to come back to this state because my mom makes me, but also because I love to come home, and this is, as you know, where I grew up. And so I intend to be able to do more here. We have over 30 steering committees in communities and states across the country that I spend time in every single week. I've been to 23 states since I started this job just a year ago. And I have a lot of interest in a number of communities that aren't in those 31, of bringing them under the fold. And there's incredible support, I know, in this state, from Fayetteville to Little Rock down to Hot Springs, and I do want to do more here. So I'm spending time, as our team members who are scattered about here, meeting with local leadership and meeting with folks on the ground and figuring out what a smart strategic partnership would look like. And so I'll be here more.
We've got two questions right here on the same row, and one is from our distinguished Senator Joyce Elliott, who has been a champion.
Hi, Senator Elliott.
Thank you. I don't know, Chad, this is not my question, but I don't know, I was sitting here, you keep saying 13 states, and somehow I think there must be some kind of patriotic connection between 13 colonies and 13 states that we can use. But my question, first of all, thank you for the work and welcome home. But my question has to do with, you mentioned division. And I am just constantly concerned, kind of looking at the audience today, always the lack of people of color when we talk about this issue. And wondering if HRC has some kind of specific outreach connection campaign to help us address that issue, because I see that people use it as a major divisive demarcation, because in the African American community in particular, we tend to be much more conservative on this issue. Admittedly, I'm an outlier, but you know.
Yeah. No, look, you're absolutely right. We have to be more diverse, not only in terms of racial and ethnic diversity, also in terms of religious diversity, in terms of the communities we talk to. Because if we only spend time in rooms talking to ourselves, we're not changing very many minds. And so we have to spend most of our time talking outside of these rooms. And it's no question, I'll give you an example. In the first meeting I did when I started this job, literally the first meeting, I landed at the airport in Washington, D.C., and I went straight to my office for the first time. And I did a meeting with Ben Jealous, who's the head of the NAACP now, a great friend and a phenomenal leader in this country, and has been a great partner. He and I talked about more ways that we could partner, more things we can do together, and we decided the first trial run was going to be in the state of Maryland. Maryland is a state that is incredibly diverse. It's about 40% African American. It's heavily Catholic, and most people, including folks in our own community, said, no way can you win in Maryland. Give it up. Fight the fight in Minnesota, in Maine, in Washington. You're never going to win in Maryland. But we organized in each of those communities. We formed a partnership with Ben and other leadership locally in the state of Maryland, and we moved the needle on every single voter block in that state, including the African American community. And without that support in the African American community, and without the support of the African American ministers and pastors, many of whom split from some of the other leadership and really stood up, and some of them paid a slight price initially, but it's one of my favorite ministers in that state talks about his congregation went from 7,000 to 10,000. He's a mega church pastor in that state, and by standing up and doing the right thing, his congregation grew dramatically. We also have an HBCU program, which I assume is what you were working with. I can't see you. What was the partnership at Flander, right? Which is another great program that I'm incredibly proud of. Again, we can always do more. We can always be better. And I commit to that. And if we're going to win, we've got to. We've got to talk to all of our communities. And you make a good point, and it's a priority for me. We've made some progress on that front, but we can do better.
No, I'm Eric McDaniel with Stonewall Democrats, and thanks again for being here. My partner and I have 6 years. We're married in May in New York about a month and a half ago, so.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So, like the two of us, so many people, after DOMA was overturned, are eager to challenge at the state level and across the nation. So, without being an attorney and not understanding, can you speak a little bit about the strategy? I know people are already gathering in all the states where there are banned and others, to bring lawsuits. Is there a strategy? Is it the more the better? Can you provide some leadership there? What would you recommend?
Well, so first I want to say there is no easy answer and there is no silver bullet. It's all of these things I talked about are what's going to get us to the finish line. So, look, this Supreme Court in oral arguments made reference to the number of states that have moved towards marriage equality and made reference to those who still haven't moved. In 1967, when the United States Supreme Court struck down bans around this country on interracial marriage, states like this still had laws on the books. There were about 13, I don't know the exact number, but about 13, less than 15 states had already wiped away that discriminatory law. The Supreme Court stepped in and in 1967 nationalized it and made it illegal to have marriage discrimination based on race. But what worked there is the ball was moved forward on all fronts. As those cases were rising to the Supreme Court, efforts were underway to move public opinion. There were state cases that were filed. There were federal cases that were filed. There were state legislatures around the country, perhaps not so many in the South, but some, that moved forward on that issue. And so we've got to move forward on all of these fronts. Now, ultimately someday, this court is getting a marriage equality case again, I assure you. And they made clear that they were getting a marriage equality case. In fact, the dissent in the DOMA decision was written by Justice Scalia, who I had the pleasure of sitting through his 7-minute, we'll call it a reading, of his passion dissent. He made clear in his dissent that the decision of the majority was ultimately going to be used in the next case that was going to come to that court that would bring full equality to this country. And he's right. There is going to be one or more federal cases that rise, and ultimately, I don't know if that's a year, I don't know if that's 3 years, I don't know if that's 5 years. No one can predict that. It took us 4.5 years from the day we filed the Proposition 8 case to get it overturned. So in less than 5 years, we were able to do it in California through our federal courts. So those kinds of cases are going to continue to rise, but we do have to be smart and strategic about the kind of cases, the location of the cases. You have some jurisdictions that are friendly. You have some that are terrible. You have to look at the precedents in those federal districts. And I defer to many of the legal minds that I trust and respect, whether it's those involved in the American Foundation for Equal Rights, people like Ted Olson and David Boies, or folks at the ACLU, or Single Lake Lad, or Lambda Legal, people who've been really the pioneers on this front. And there's sometimes maybe differing opinions, but it's really important that we listen to those who've helped to lead the way. So I don't know the exact answer in this state, what's right for what right now. What I do know is we have lots of hearts and minds to change while these decisions are being made, and that's what we need to do.
One more.
First of all, thank you so much to both of you for being here. You're so eloquent, and your courage and all the things that you do, both nationally and here in our state. Thank you so much. My name is John Bangert, and I'm a little bit nervous to say this, but after 27 years, my partner and I are going to be getting married on September the 6th. But
Congrats.
Thank you very much. As an older person, approaching soon to be 65 years of age, it's very difficult, as anybody in this room probably knows that has gotten to that point in time, to figure out what to do about things like Medicare and things of those types. I'm really pleased to see that there are some good resources that you all had already, with your good forethought, put out on the web. Do you have any other suggested resources as we move forward into that retirement time that we can go to? So primarily about resources.
Well, again, congratulations. Where are you getting married? In Seattle, Washington. Excellent. So just as I started a year ago, we started a new health and aging program at HRC. And we started rating hospitals across the country as it relates to their treatment of LGBT people and same-sex partners, and there are a lot of issues there, as many of you have probably experienced or at least can imagine. We are now moving in onto the aging side of that, of really looking at elder care, at nursing homes, at assisted living facilities. That's just a very small sliver of what needs to be done in this space. But you point out, you know, on both ends of the life spectrum, for our young people as well as for our seniors, I mean, that's who we should care for the most. That's who we should care for the most. And we need to do a lot more when it comes to aging and the issues around aging. There's a fantastic organization that I love called SAGE. And SAGE is an organization that focuses solely on that. They're a great online resource, by the way, but in terms of their facilities, I don't know everywhere they are, but they're certainly in the Northeast, in the New York area, and in California. We now need to start filling that gap of everything in between and providing more and more resources. But Dr. Shane Snowden, who runs that program for us, her first day was the day before my first day. So we've made a lot of progress in these first 12 months, but I intend to do more, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I met, just a year ago, I met someone here. I don't know if he's here today. I hear him back there. You heard him. Richard, stand up and wave. Richard, I met Richard. I believe you were 74 years old. I'm sorry I'm outing you, Richard, on your age there. Richard was 74, I think, when I met him here in this very room, and he stood up and actually it was at the event just after this where I met you, Richard, and he told me the eloquent story of his life and the challenges that he had in terms of coming out of the closet very, very late in life. And then I actually invited Richard as, were you my date, Richard? I think Richard was my date. To HRC's national dinner that we do every year. That's about 3,000 people, but I flew Richard up and had him there as my guest for that dinner. And we talked about the challenges. And I didn't have all the answers, and I still don't have all the answers. I can tell you some of the things that exist in terms of resources, but what I know for a fact is there's a lot more that we need to do. And Richard's given me a lot of his thoughts, as have many others around the country, and I'd love to hear more from you as well. Just before we go, I want to introduce my family who's here today. So my stepdad and my mother, Butch and Betty, you can stand up. And this is my nephew and the real star in our family, Griffin. Stand up and wave. You can stand up here. Stand up. I think he's about ready to give a speech. He was at the press conference this morning. My sister Angie, Ronnie, Jill, Janan, and Bob. Former State Representative Bob Arnold. I don't think I missed anyone. But anyway, my family has been incredibly supportive, and many have become advocates and allies for equality, as I know many of you are. My parents have the HRC sticker on their car, and every day almost, my mother sends me a text. I'm always like, what's wrong? What's she texting me about? And it's a picture of some car driving down the street in some state that has the HRC sticker on it. I hope she's not in the driver's seat when she's taking those pictures. But again, it's just a reminder of the progress we can make all across this country, including places like right here in Arkansas. And you have my commitment that I'm going to keep coming back, and I'm not going to stop till we have delivered full equality to every single state in this country, including right here in Arkansas.